Hi, my name is Bjørn Jacobsen. I'm here at DBS Music in Bristol to do a talk on game audio. Briefly, my name is Bjørn Jacobsen. I'm older than I look, and I am from Copenhagen. I'm a game sound designer, and we're here to just talk about game audio in general. And this is going to be more like one giant Q&A session. So if you ever have a question, you just raise your hand and we talk about it, because that's way more loose, and I prefer it that way. So no holding back. Maybe you're not the only person who didn't get it or something like that. It's kind of important. Anyway, so why are we here today? We are here to talk about game audio. So briefly, who am I? Who is my daddy? What does he do? And that's not my age, it's just the answer to everything. I'm 38, by the way. I live and work out of Copenhagen, Denmark. I do video game sound design as a freelancer now. Until recently, I was an in-house guy. I used to work at some really nice places. To me, it feels like I've been working at just a couple of places, and I started my career last year, but that's totally not true, judging by all these nice numbers that are popping up. I've been fortunate enough to work on some really cool stuff. And I actually work at all these places except for CD Projekt Red and CCP now. Until 3 weeks ago, I was working at CD Projekt Red on Cyberpunk 2077, which is this mediocrely overhyped project that it's been really exciting to work on. Nothing to say about it. All the stuff that's official is already shown, and I can't really show anything except for I have some examples of how I did my work test when I got hired there and so on. It's not necessarily because my story is more important than other people's stories about how to get into the industry, but it's kind of important to know that the path is not straight, and my story is no exception to that. And the way that I taught, or I learned things through learning by doing or by other people, that gave me a lot of advantages later on that I didn't understand. I didn't understand when I was learning them that this was going to be a huge advantage later on. So whenever you have a teacher that says something and you say, what am I going to use this shit for ever, then later in life you might find out that it's actually extremely important, which I benefited a lot from. Hang on. So all these projects, some of them are really big, some of them are really small. This game DARQ is something that we're working on. Well, it used to be in my spare time, now it's kind of full-time. We're planning a release really soon. Wrath was this recently announced game by 3D Realms, which is made in the original Quake engine, which gives me nightmares to work in. Shark Mob is a Swedish company that I do some stuff for. Wargaming, they have a new mobile game coming out, Hitman. I used to work on. Logic Artists just hired me, and I used to do the official tutorial levels for Unity. And they actually, all the ones that I did, they've all been pulled from the platform. I don't know why. So they're no longer available, but I used to do them, or at least I did one big one for Unity 5. And then I did EVE Online, which is also a semi-big, kind of nice universe to work in, which we'll get to, because that's a nightmare to work on compared to some of these other games, as much as it's a nightmare to play, but that's beside the point. So my life starts out probably as most other people's lives. I'm 4 years old, and they gave me this Odyssey 2, and it was called the Philips G7000 in Europe, and that's how things work. I've always been playing video games, oddly enough. And I still have this very open memory of not knowing what video games was, but there was one day when my dad was going to his office and in the middle of the night and said, you have to come. There was a problem at my office and I have to go and fix it. And I didn't want to go, but he said, there's a video game there. And I had no idea what a video game was, but we went there and I was like hooked instantly. I was like 4 or 5 years old. We went there, and this game was a Digger. It's from '84, I think. It was really nice, but that sort of like got me extremely hooked on how to work with computers. I gained an interest in anything electronic, anything interactive, anything that you could touch. This is like late '80s, beginning of the '90s, so the hottest tool you could have at daycare was a walkie-talkie. It's like you could just interested in pushing the button. That was about it. And later in life, I started to be very interested in electronic music, but the same way with the video games. I had no idea what electronic music was. I was just attracted to it. Nobody in my crease of acquaintances or my family or anything like that listened to it. They didn't listen to death metal, which was also the other style that I was listening to. I wasn't very old, but yet I started making electronic music at home back in mid-90s. And because I had no one to talk to, this is pre-YouTube, all I could do was just load up software and try to make it do stuff, which again later in life turned out to be a huge advantage because that made me my approach to obstacles and tools that I don't understand, tools that I don't know, has become extremely easy for me to just look at and be like, oh, okay, and then it works. And I don't read manuals at all, as you shouldn't. But my electronic music career started to grow, and it may sound very humble, but this is my teenage room when I'm 15 years old. And this is a 40-channel mixing desk. It was kind of like a mediocre, small, I spent all my money on it, and my mom hated it. And I was asked maybe a million times, is this a phase? But this, and it's not a phase, trust me. It never stops. But this career sort of like moved forward. I still had at that time I didn't know that you could actually do video games at all. And I didn't understand that this music career of mine was something that I could use for anything useful other than just making dance floor tracks. I'm 19 in Løkken, a place up in northern Denmark. Probably very drunk. That's why I'm holding on to the synth. It's not because I'm touching the knob. And these gigs, they just got bigger and bigger. And I think these are some of the last gigs that we had with like a couple of thousand people. And it may sound like a little humble, and I'm taking it very loosely, but at this time I was way more interested in creating single sounds, single things that could make the tracks cool, but also how can I make sounds that I can use for other things. So my techno career sort of gradually stopped. I had my first release in the 90s, and be prepared for very young pictures of me. If you ever played Tekken, you know Jin Kazama, and yeah, so but I did legit look like this in the 90s. It was like it's not kind of like today I'd say it was a joke back then, but it wasn't. So anyway, but it moves on, and in I think around 2000, I hear about this company in Denmark called IO Interactive, and they are creating a game called Hitman. They made the first Hitman game. And I remember sitting at home and thinking, so don't they need a sound guy? And today I'm actually really pissed off at myself that I didn't ask them. I didn't even ask them, like, can you use a guy like me? Because I thought I am completely useless. I'm probably not skilled enough or anything like that. And probably I wasn't, but probably more skilled than most people at the time. Which is, I guess, like my best advice is that if you think you're good enough, you should just apply. The worst thing that can happen is that they turn you down. When I was making music, this here is actually a 5-minute track that I made for school once. But this could just as well have been 2-second sound. My sessions for a couple of second sounds for a video game could easily look like this. And it looks very complex. It's not really, because if you build it yourself, it's not that complex. But I found out that my creative approach to how to make sounds for any kind of project, any kind of short film or movie or whatever project I was working on, the approach was the same. So a 1 second sound is, to me, one-to-one comparable to a composition of a couple of hours or anything like that. The approach was the same. So when I started working on it, I found out that this is my approach to EQing and brick wall limitation and so on. And I found out quite quickly that when I spoke to people on forums who are classically schooled, then this is apparently not the way to do it. I don't know why, but you've probably all been on forums where you've met people who are extremely fascist about, ooh, there's only one way to do it, and that's the correct way. My first meeting with that was when I was submitting sounds for a Nord modular synth forum at one point. And everybody was saying that, oh, these sounds are really cool. What did you do to record them? It's like, I made this patch in the Nord modular, and I recorded them and I sent them to you. Oh, wow, really awesome sounds. What did you use for preamp? Like, what? And then I don't think I even knew what a preamp was. So I just plugged it into my sound card and recorded. And that changed their idea of how good the sound was, because suddenly it was no longer a good sound, because it was incorrect to record it without the preamp, because suddenly they had this opinion that, wow, there is a small fizz in the highs. Yeah. And it bothered me a lot for years, because if that was politically correct on how to produce sounds, because I always thought that my sounds were great. Well, I thought they were, but it didn't matter if others did. But I found out that the stuff that I had learned through making electronic music was suddenly extremely valuable, because when I was about to approach a sound, because I wasn't schooled, I would just do what I knew would then sound good and not what would sound correct. And in the end, that made me much faster than everybody else when I was working on various projects. And so it pushed me forward into trying to break into the video game industry. At this point in time, my techno career was still going. This is probably like 2008, something like that. So I couldn't break into the game audio industry. I was trying to reach out to every company that I could find, probably as most people have ever tried. You apply at everywhere and you get no response whatsoever. And if you get one, it's literally like, fuck you, you can't get in. So I started to figure out how can I build a resume? How can I build a portfolio without working in games? Because apparently I need a portfolio of games to get a job in games, and I can't get a portfolio without working in games. This weird way of things that just works against each other. So in Denmark, I'm lucky enough that there is this huge short film industry for kids and teenagers and young people who wants to make short films. And there's a funding for it, and they fund that you can rent gear and so on, and then everybody works for free, because everybody understands that the director needs the movie, the short film, for his application for film school, the sound guy needs it for film school, the writer needs it for the journalist school, and so on. So everybody just works towards a common goal. And before you know it, if you end up on the phone number list of some producer, you are easily called like once a week to work on a short film like that, which was really nice. So I started building this list of short films, and it gave me a lot of experience in how to hold a boom pole, and I felt this is completely useless, this is not going to help me later in life with video games, until I found out that it was extremely important to know how microphone placement worked in terms of when I was going to record stuff. This led me to, this is at the end of my electronic music career. Because very different from how other people were working, I decided to make this Maximus. This is a really bad photo, but this is a Nord modular. And I made this Maximus P patch that could DJ on the Nord modular, so that I could go out and play with that instead of using Tractor or whatever. Just press play and stand and smile and watch the dance floor. And that was quite different, because I started to gain an interest in how can I make tools that do what I want instead of I do what the tool want me to do. I start to make tools that do whatever I want. And this was basically just a tool that would map, play, pitch up stuff, but then you could just on the fly loop and so on. And this is the thing in action. This is New Year's Eve in Holland in 2010, I think. And that's the morning after, so that's had a lot of fun with that. But this is one of my last gigs ever, because at this time I was fighting really hard to get some video game experience. But then in Denmark they have this study called the Danish Academy of Digital and Interactive Entertainment, which I was totally not eligible to go to, but they were lacking sound designers every year, so I just wrote them an email and said, hey, can I be like your substitute? And I could. So I started working on these really small games. You get like, we get like 1 month, like 20 people in a room, you get 1 month, make a game. And the games may not be necessarily very good, but the outcome is that you've learned a lot and you have a small game that you can put on your resume, which I found out this is the reason why I even got into the industry, was that I was just able to show I have worked on something really small. So I made these 2 games first. This was called Subway Samurai. It was a horrible game where you get out of a subway and you have to run through these people to catch the next subway. And I did some chiptune-ish music, and it was nice. But I didn't know how to code. I didn't know how engines worked or anything like that. So it was a great experience for me to see how game engines actually work, because it's nothing compared to what I thought it was. I thought that it was going to be extremely linear and I could just do whatever I wanted and things would work out of the blue and I didn't have to understand any kind of coding or scripting or anything like that until logic, like in my face, hit me, and it made me realize, okay, there's much more to this than I thought there was. Then we made this game. This is the second year. And this game is called Rasul. It's just a point-and-click adventure game where you solve small puzzles on a small island. And this is where I was lucky enough to have a small audio programming team. And one of the programmers told me, why don't we make a tool that will make it easy for you to implement something on your own? And that's my first experience with actually having a tool, so that I don't have to code you don't have to script everything yourself. You don't have to invent the wheel all the time. He made a tool that I could just drag and drop so that I could make things happen whenever I wanted to. And that was really interesting, because that led me to understand the importance of tool creation, which is also what John Romero says in most of his videos, that the most important thing is to make tools for your developers, which I agree on. Then, don't bother with the text. We made this game. This is the 3rd year. And this game is my entry point to my professional career. Because this game is directed by a gay guy, not gay, he's a guy called David Adler. And he has the same approach to creativity as me. And he said, this is a school game. This is the first, last, and probably only time ever in our career that we're going to have complete creative freedom. So let's make something that's completely fucked up. We'll push the limits on everything we can. Just like, when people play this game, we want graphics people to be overwhelmed, like effects people to be overwhelmed. Sound should be out of this world, and there should be happening narratively so many crazy things that people will talk about this game for no reason. It's just going to be interesting. So, I have some videos of that. And this is my first experience with starting to think about the interactive, that it's not just about, in video games, placing sounds on whenever the character takes a step. No, I want the character's sounds of steps to change depending on what material she's stepping on. It may sound like super simple, but I want the steps to be louder if she's in danger. I want the steps to be lower if she's not in danger. And if she dies, I want the music and everything to slow down. I want things to, it made me realize that video games is like this one giant piece of interactive art that comes to life. So, what do you do in a first-person games that that really scares people? Like, let's see if it works. Okay, we have to fast forward ourselves. But anyway, this is the game. You save your son, and he's all of the game is just like this. You run around in this train, and these train cars becomes very different. Becomes like out of this world. There's vaginas and Hitlers and dicks and everything all over the place. Like the moon is a face of Hitler, and it's not because we like Hitler. He was just the director was just trying to provoke people to get the attention of other people. So the only weapon that you have is this glass shard. And what do you do with a glass shard? Here we are. That has never been done in games before. So we entered this giant church. There's a bat hanging from the ceiling, and you walk around, and in first-person view, you stab your own eyes out with this glass shard.
This Unity?
Yeah, back in 2011, I think, 10. And the rest of the game is inverted in colors like this. The reason why this is cool, first of all, because it was creative freedom. You just do whatever I wanted. And the director, his only advice every time I presented something to it was always like, more, just add more. Which was really cool because that makes me realize I'm really lucky to work with this director once in a lifetime, because I've never had a director after that who was that ballsy to actually do anything like that. I think this here is the second video that we were supposed to show. And you've and if you can imagine all the screams and horror sounds, it's just me eating an orange in a bathroom, like bleh, all the time. Yeah, well, okay, you get the point. It's a great little game. We even got PewDiePie to play it, and he enjoyed it. Of course, screaming while he was playing it. So after that, and this is where I start to realize that why I love making sound for video games, because I found out I have some creative freedom that I don't have when I make linear material. I don't mind making linear material, but I like to understand the concept of how to put things together in an interactive context all the time. Which also later in my career, every time I get a new task, I don't think sound design necessarily. I usually think implementation first, which is different. I think about where can I put my events, where can I put my triggers, and in my head I already have this combined soundscape of something that I know how will work in a certain way, rather than thinking of one sound. And I'm already thinking of which parameters do I have and so on. We'll get to that when we talk about the game DARQ that I'm going to show you a lot from. By the way, for the first time in the world. So this here, after all those games, I did the usual redesigns of videos, which I guess most of you have done, like taking some material from a video game and you try to redo the sound for it. The problem about redoing sound for trailers and stuff like that, this is actually not a redesign that I did, but this is the test that I got back from IO Interactive when I was applying at the time. I didn't get the job. My future lead did. We were the only two left in 2007. And the problem with these kind of redesigns is that if you made this, usually, unless you did something bad, if you create a great redesign and you post it on your website, then people will usually comment on it with critique and feedback and so on. If you had been working at the company and submitted exactly the same video, it would have been good enough to put into the game, and you would probably have been praised because this video is awesome. There's a huge difference between redesigned material and material that you want to show people in the actual end product. So redesigning things is more for your, I found out later, is more for your own practice and not really what people at companies want to see. When I hire people now, which I'm lucky enough to be able to do, I don't necessarily look at their redesign videos. Maybe I listen for, do they do cool sounds or do they have cool ideas, but I don't necessarily watch the whole thing as a thing, because maybe I know the original game and my vision of it is clouded. But this is the test at IO Interactive. That did not get me the job. So. They asked for no music, by the way. And that's how you don't get a job. And I've never been able to find the video that my future boss submitted, so I don't know what to compare it to. But they didn't hire me, and he's older than me, by the way, so I guess that's why. I have to find an excuse. Yeah, and finally, I got an internship because of all these short games and all these short films I had done and so on. When suddenly school told me, I was at the university at the time studying my master's in audio design, they told me, you need an internship. You cannot go to these official productions of small games any longer because you've done 3 games now and normally people only get to do 1. So you've done way too much. You need an internship. And I posted on my Facebook page, hey, I have all this experience and I need an internship. If anyone knows anyone, please do. And my Facebook page lit up like a Christmas tree, which was really cool. A pat on the shoulder for myself, and my imposter syndrome started to really kick in because I had no idea what I was doing. And I also found out later that when you actually get a job, you find out that the industry is completely different to what you expect, which we'll get to. But at this moment, I had offers at DICE, at CCP, at Bethesda, and a couple of others who were all trying to, because I wrote, instead of saying I need an internship, I asked, just consider me free work for hire for 3 to 6 months. We just call it you sign a paper saying that this is an internship and I'll work for free for 6 months or 3 to 6 months. And apparently that worked really well. So CCP called as the first guys. And this is in Iceland, which means that it was closer to home. I didn't have to okay, DICE is in Stockholm, but nobody wants to live in Sweden. No. These guys came first, and they wanted to work on EVE Online, and so I moved to Iceland for 3 months to work there. And I had been there for a week when they told me we would like to hire you, which was also a pat on the shoulder, which I was very happy about. But then I found out that the small games that I had done at university, they're way more advanced than the engine that these guys have. Because these guys have no tools, like whatsoever. And that's when you start to realize that okay, so even big companies, I always had this fantasy about that when you get hired at a AAA company, they have tools that we normal mortals don't have access to. And that's actually completely not true. They work the exact same fashion as the rest of us do. And they have the exact same problems. Maybe they have more time to solve them, but they face the exact same problems that we do. And they solve them the exact same messed up, hacked ways by just muting something or just changing volumes or moving stuff out of the picture so that you can't hear it. It's not always pretty. It's really not. And it's very surprising. It also makes you find out that understanding, you don't have to be a coder, but understanding code, understanding how things work under the hood, understanding how scripting work, understanding how visual scripting like Maximus P and Blueprint in Unreal, that's extremely important because that's what you're going to be doing 90% of the time. Like at CCP, I guess 20% of my time was actually designing sound. The rest of the time was just putting them in and making sure that they work and test them and so on. And that's really important to know because if you are trying to get a job in the industry and you are just expecting to sit and be creative and do sounds all the time, then no, that's not what you get to do. Actually, I think I have a video in a folder here. Anyway, is there any questions while I look for that?
How did you find the experience overall working in Iceland CCP?
Iceland is nice. Beer is very expensive.
Yeah. It is, isn't it? Like how they worked as a team.
We were with me.
Just overall, like with the actual audio team.
Yeah, that's me.
Was it just you?
No, we had an audio director who would literally just say what he wanted, and then I would do it. And that was the audio team that they had. And I think I actually have a picture of the desk. Yeah, welcome to the industry. Like my desk was the size of this. I had 2 monitors. I brought my own gear, my own sound card, my own little Nord synth, and a microphone, and that's it. No professional studio and so on, and they expect Hollywood quality tomorrow. And that's literally like that. Trust me, that happens more than you know. But at CCP, I bumped into this problem that I found out. I posted on their forum, hey, I'm the new intern. Rock on, I'm gonna make this game so awesome. The problem is that I found out that people who play Eve, have anyone actually played Eve? Yeah. Yes, okay, wonderful. I started playing it when I got hired, and I found out that this game is a full-time job, more than my actual job. But then most people played without sound in Eve for some reason, and there's a joke that Eve has sound. And yes, it does, but the problem was that I was really interested and really curious about why do people turn off the sound? Maybe because the sound wasn't bad, but maybe just because at some point it was bad or something like that. And then I found out, and that's been my strength ever since, and some of the things that I really advocate to do, is that they have their game, and then they have their graphics, and then they have sound which is like put on top, just as a fluffy thing. It's not combined, it's not connected in any way to the gameplay, to the graphics, or anything like that. It sounds great and looks great, but there's no connection to it. So I started to propose, then why don't we make it a tactical advantage to turn on sound? Like you can hear when the enemy is approaching. And that, I think the stats, I think we raised the bar for who played with sound on for like 25%, like instantly, by making it a tactical advantage. And then posting on their forum about, you can now hear when enemies are approaching. You can hear when you're being scanned. You can hear when people do things. And that was an epiphany to me, just like some of the other games, that I can now, instead of just being interactive, I can also be interactive with game design. And I think it's very subtle, but we can always crank up the volume. Right, Rich? Is there a max limit?
Up to 11.
All right. Okay, so this here is a hacking sequence where you hack things. It's really dark. Okay, so these are small nodes. It's a very typical hacking game. You click the nodes and then you move to the other thing. The point is, you have these points and you spend a point every time you hack through it. But actually, if you hover the nodes that you have not clicked, there's a tiny noise in the background, which is directly linked to the percentage of how likely is it that this node is bad. And we didn't tell anyone, we just made it. So, and when we then presented that at the I mean, EVE Online has its own convention called FanFest, which is great. So when we presented it there, people actually showed up to the audio keynote because they wanted to know what other things have you hidden in the game, because they wanted to know. We'll just show it here. It's very brief. It's a tiny click. So those are the same, but this one is different. So if you know which sound is linked to what, you would be able to tell which one is most likely to be the safe node to click to proceed. And people went mental when they found out, because like why would you give away something like that? And honestly, also maybe because I didn't tell the game designers that I put in that kind of feature. So when we did, but I found out that this is the way forward if you want to make video games. And the future of video games lied in the fact that sound could become part of the game's design, no longer this fluffy thing on top. Like sounding like a Hollywood movie is one thing, but what if we want to sound like a Hollywood game, like where the game becomes, where the soundscape becomes the game, where you actually listen. This is how it worked. You click these nodes, and you would get this radio interference noise generated with a DARQ, which I generated just noises. And then we just link them, and they're all loops, and they're played in wise, and they just loop. But then they're linked to this this parameter. That's what is the percentage. There's low, medium, and high risk of what you can do. But that's the same thing with later in the game. You can get this get these nodes and anomalies in space, and you can hover those with your mouse as well. And then the radio static that you hear is also linked to the amount of NPCs at that location. So you could, of course, you can always just Google it and look up how difficult is this. But you would actually, if you would know how to listen, you could just hover the nodes and then be able to tell, is this a safe place for me to go? Eventually I quit, and actually I think there's a IO Interactive logo somewhere in there. And this is why learning Maximus P, Blueprint, and all those things are really nice, because this is how you script in the Hitman G2 engine. Of course it's different, but it's same. And this is also where we started to link up stuff to how do sounds work. Brief overview. Let's say there's a Boolean value here. And some game designer has set that value to become true when some plane is in vision and you need to fire. But I've hooked that up to that the wind sounds like it's distorting in your ear when the plane is actually in view. So even if you don't have any graphical feedback, you will hear the wind in your ear. So if you are me, you will know when to fire, because I put that in and I didn't tell anyone.
I was going to say, is that the same as when you recorded with the microphone, like the wind?
No, it's me into the
Yeah,
microphone.
you put that on Hitman, innit, when you go to the edges.
Yes, that is the noise, and it is me. Because that was the easiest way to do it. I don't know if you know, but I have this YouTube channel where I show some of these things and talk about it a lot.
What's the code?
Huh?
What's the code?
youtube.com/Cujo Sound. I'll give you a link. But there's tons of these explanations of how these systems works and why sounds here are cooler than others and why they were made up in ways. We can always get to that. This is like an ordinary animation editor in Hitman in the G2 engine. And funny enough, if you've seen the animation editor in Unity, it looks almost identical. They always look like that. And here we have a video. And this is just, and it's really basic. But that's the thing, the more basic these tools, the easier they are to work with. So you don't get this tool that can do more than you think. It can't do anything but that. You can only trigger these very simple things. So once you get to work in the AAA industry, you find out that, okay, sure, they all do it differently, but they all have tools that are, at IO Interactive, they had the best tools I've ever seen, but no names mentioned. I've been at other companies where it was worse, with bigger projects too, without giving away which one. But in Hitman, we started to work on how can we make sound design part of our game's design. And one of the things was that I presented this system where when to fire your gun, when can you leave? Like if you're in vision of an NPC, but you're behind a pillar, so he can't see you, the music should change if you would go into vision, so that you could just listen for the musical cues. But this here is a system that we made where, imagine if this is just hollow floorboards. They all sound like floorboards, but when you step on one of the blue tiles, you get this. The sound of the floor is more hollow, and that's where the treasure would be hidden or something like that. So literally, the only cue for you to do something would be the sound. We spent a lot of time talking to the game designers about how do we connect these sort of things, because game designers don't think audio first. They shouldn't either, but the audio design team are usually completely forgotten about. So you sort of like need to step up yourself and talk to them, because else stuff like that won't happen. And these are internal engine videos, which is why they're not rendered. But this is really like a test environment in Hitman. And this is just a test of how does it sound, how does the transition sound when I walk from one material to the other. And that was the plan. Like this, we wanted the floor to sound like it was hollow whenever you were stepping on a specific thing. It's very simple, but it brought the life back into the game. Well, not only, of course. Okay, so what you're looking at right now, this is the entire ambient sound system in Hitman, which is 2 RGPC curves in Wise. And that's all there is to it. These RGPCs are, I guess you're familiar with Wise, all of y'all. Okay. Every sound in Hitman for the ambient system would be a game object placed in the dead center of any ambient area. And these would have these values connected to each of the game objects, which meant that whenever you would pass from one area to the other, the value would then change from 1 to 0, basically, and mute it and muffle it. And you could, of course, alter the speed of how it would do so on that. But this is the only parameter that would be at the top chain of the hierarchy of the Hitman ambient system. And then everything else would be done in the code and in the editor. And on the Y side of things, this was all there was to it at the top of the chain on how to control, how to move from one area to the other. And this is how good I am at paint. If you imagine walking from area A to B, you could set these bars. This is the center where you decide this is where the dead center between these are. And then the more you would drag these closer to the center, it would change from 0 to 1 or the other way around, depending on which one you're leaving. And then you could simply tell it, when I'm leaving this area, I want the transition to be really quick that way, but I want it to be really slow the other way. Like if this room was more important than the other, the transition would be slower because there's further to this bar here. You would simply place this on a door. You can imagine like a plane of something that you put on this door, and then you placed another plane where you said, this is the distance between 0 and 1, and that's it. And then when you walk from area to area, it just changed that RGPC value per game object, and that's it. And that's a very simple tool, but it did really do some nice results. I don't know if you played Hitman, the 2 latest ones. When I work and when I create a sound for a video game like this, then instead of this is one sound that is being played. But all of these are individual sounds that I have created or made out of something. because I work from this approach and that's because I'm self-made in that regard. Some call it layer cake, a layer production. I call it Lego because I consider it that whenever I need to create a sound, I already have it in my head what I want to achieve. But I then run through my library, I run through all my recordings, and if I need to record something, I go and do that. But I consider it Lego building blocks of this thing I'm eventually going to end up with. So it may be a 10-minute file, but I only use a fraction of it. And then I know that this will be a nice crack. This will be a nice boom. This will be a nice thing. And then I combine it. And of course, I'm also thinking implementation, which we'll get to. But this is how I produce a sound. I create all these building blocks and I put them all together. I think this is a dome opening. So let's take a look at one of the video games that I'm working on right now so that we can sort of figure out how that works. Okay, so me and this guy called Vlad, we got in touch about 2 years ago. And then he's working on this game called DARQ. And I'm just doing it with him, basically. The funny thing about working on DARQ is that, do we need a break, by the way, before we continue? Okay. DARQ, it's really funny because I work on all the sounds in this blindly. I don't see any footage before I actually do the sounds. And to begin with, I didn't even have the project when I was working on stuff because he just didn't want to share it. He's not a game developer normally, which has come up with a very interesting pipeline. So now I just create the sounds and I put them into FMOT and I ship the project to him and then he implements it for me. I do get videos so that we can sort of put it all together, but it's been very, very interesting because it's very, very different pipeline than I normally do.
So no concept art or
Nothing.
Nothing.
No, but in the beginning, I would get an email from him saying, okay, there's a cog and it goes into this wheel, it turns, and then we need this big hammer falling down. Great. So, how are we gonna do that? So I would start creating, actually, but it worked out really well. But there are some the video that I wanted to show you before is missing, so we'll just continue with this. But DARQ here, I was told when I came here that there'd be a nice speaker setup and a sub, which is why I brought this particular game. And like I said, you are actually the first to hear this ever outside of our dev environment. The aesthetic of this game is that it's actually very, very silent while we play it. You want to turn it off? Yeah. Just while we watch these. The aesthetic is here that the game is actually extremely silent when you play it, but every time you interact with something, it's extremely loud. Before you all came in, we were just explaining it to Rich earlier, and it's I think every sound is like a compressor, a limiter, an EQ, a compressor, and some reverb, and some compressor, and then maybe a brick wall at the end. Literally, so that every sound is maxed to its limits, even if it's a tiny sound that's supposed to be really, really low in the soundscape or really pushed back. It's really extremely loud, so everything is just in your face. But also, this is work in progress, so if there are some weird transitions, you know why. And also because I don't implement stuff myself yet into this. So one thing that's cool about DARQ is that we have these so-called vertical transitions, where you transition, you turn the entire game. You have these vertical transitions. Instead of the world turning the way that you saw before, the other way, you can also rotate the other way. And how do we make sounds for that? So this is where implementation first is really important, because when I saw this feature, I started to create, okay, so we have this sound where I need some debris sound, so I started to create a debris sound. Didn't even care about the rest. And then, okay, I need a swoosh sound and and whatever. I started to create those individual parts. And in my head, I know what this is going to be combined. So I literally just drag and drop them all into Fmod when I'm done, and then it plays, and then it sounds like this. And this is without producing it in one go. This is just producing layers and putting it together in Fmod. And then there are all these details in it where we start to add things. All these rustling sounds, things that are shaking over here, they're all linked to individual game objects. So in my head, when we were creating this, I was thinking the 3D soundscape. If I add a rattling sound to this piece of metal, then it will only be audible when he walks through it, instead of creating like one sound that plays all the time. So the importance of working in 3D in your head when you're creating the soundscape is way more, well, not way more important, but it's a really smart way of doing it, so that you think of that first before you even put stuff in, so that you don't end up working in a linear fashion at all. The sound of my kitchen after a party, literally. The bottles. And I do have the Fmod project with me, so you can actually see it afterwards. So this is when you pick up things here. All the sounds, well, the sound of picking up something is always the same, but then every item has a unique sort of way of expressing itself. Like a key sounds like a key, of course. And here you pick up this octagon that has another sound. And those are always combined. So there is a layer of something that's recognizable, but the item also has a sound. That octagon that we just picked up is going to be used in a puzzle that we made here. And that tiny piano, if you watch my YouTube channel, then you will know that I actually smashed a piano. I bought a new house with my now ex-wife, that doesn't matter. where there was a piano and it was left over, and I asked the real estate agent, can the piano stay? Because this is a really bad piano, and we just put up a bunch of microphones and then we hammered it. It was really fun, like a crowbar, like straight into the strings of the piano. But that became the sounds of this piano that you're going to see right here. Yes, and this is where the level changes, as maybe you can tell. And the moment that's coming now, that's my daughter breathing, just so you know. And she's not sick. Did it work? Good. That's actually a test. Okay, that final laugh, that was me. That's not my daughter. That's... I'll show you a minute in F-mod how that works. What?
Brittle compression there.
What do you mean compression? Like everything is a... but that's really the point. So anyway, so the dynamite that you just picked up, you pick up this corkscrew, and then there is this tiny puzzle where the power to the dynamite runs through this cable, but the cable is severed. So the sound of being electrocuted is very nice. It actually ends here because I actually don't remember how to solve the puzzle. That's why the video stops. But that's how DARQ sounds, and that's the same approach as I used when I was, like I said in the beginning of this. This is where when we were talking about how do we want the soundscape for this game to be. This is where my old days of working with techno really came in, because if there's something that I learned from techno, then it's brick wall compression and kick drums, and that's the way we put this together, literally. You can turn it on, sure.
Do you think it's more important to like focus on the big Hollywood sort of sounds or the subtle effects, or do you have a happy medium? what people
I like working with subtle stuff, mainly also because I've noticed in really big companies, they're not willing to pay for Hollywood quality. We want Hollywood quality tomorrow, but we won't give you, I don't know, 10 grand to record Foley.
Yeah.
So you record Foley in a small studio on your own with headphones and bad microphones. So I prefer working with what I have and then making the best of that, which is also why it's way more interesting to work on a game like this, where I can go nuts in my workstation rather than having to sound, I don't know, realistic.
What's your like actual recording equipment for Foley and stuff like that? What do you usually use like at home and stuff?
I've used my phone a lot, like seriously. That's one thing. That's if I don't have anything else. But also I have some Sennheiser equipment, a 416 and a 418 if I need MS microphones. And usually I record stuff very far away, like a couple of meters away from the source, so that I don't get any proximity. And then I usually spend a lot of time cleaning it up afterwards. I don't mind manipulation. Some people are very much against preserving the audio ecology and you're not supposed to manipulate stuff, and I say bullshit. I edit the shit out of everything I do.
How did you make the electricity sound?
It's if you take what's it called in Danish? It's a spole. It's you create this B-field microphone where you take you have a coil with yeah, but basically no, you have a coil with a wrapped around wire, and normally it has 3 contacts, which is positive and the negative and then the ground. But if you switch the two so that they short circuit, that means that the coil itself becomes extremely sensitive to anything. So just holding the tiny coil, it's not bigger than this, to a monitor like this or to an electrical source will make it go. And then, of course, it's not fun to do like this, but if you place the microphone in one place and then move the electrical source around it, or 2 electrical sources, you can make these really crazy things with it. So maybe you remember the Kane and Lynch video that didn't get me the job? Well, then I also have this one that actually got me a job at CD Projekt Red. The file that I'm missing that I wanted to show you is actually how I created the gun sound for this one. But I have the original file, I'll show you. So that got me the job, finally, because Kane and Lynch apparently didn't. But this is the sound of that gun that you heard is actually this sound. It's a wooden ball that it's this one coming now. It's a wooden ball thrown against a basketball hoop in a gym at an abandoned school that we totally didn't break into to record stuff. Was it? Well, I can say that now. The school's gone. So, but we went into this school to record stuff in the basement and stuff breaking and so on. And then we found this abandoned gym, and they had all these wooden balls, and we threw them around. So this is that's a bit unfortunate. I'm missing a video because I wanted to show you. But imagine when you edit sound files, instead of editing the waveform, if you edit the spectrum instead. And then instead of editing horizontally, you start to edit vertically. This is Cubase, and me and Cubase, we have been in a relationship for many years. this here original file is, and apparently the sound of the sound card is at the wrong sample rate, but that doesn't matter. Oh wait, it didn't convert it. Okay. This original file is 192K, a really, really crazy recording. The thing is about this recording is that even though the microphone cannot record louder than 20K, well, it says it can. Of course, it can record louder than that. Then if we can't see the spectrum here, can we? No. But if you could see the spectrum, you would notice that there are hundreds of things going on at 40, 50, 60, 70, 90K, stuff like that, because the microphone is distorting. Because when microphones distort, they create these artifacts outside of their normal audible recording range. So you may hear the click. And the point in that click is that then instead of editing in that direction, you take, let's say, if this is the audible range that we can normally hear, then this part up here, instead of pitching everything down, you cut this part out and pitch only that part down on top of the other one. So that it's only the inaudible frequencies that become audible. The rest stays the way it is. And then, of course, a lot of things mixed together and put on top and so on. But that eventually becomes the gun sound that you heard before. If we just, convert to, yes, please. I bet we can't hear this one then. Yeah, so these are the inaudible frequencies that are just pitched down. Of course, these are they're very brittle and kind of pointless and useless. But the whole point is, of course, when you experiment with this, you find the right place where these can become useful and mix them together with the other ones.
Kind of sounds like they'd be good for like water droplets off a pipe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So a sound like this, if I created a sound like this, I would normally, that's what I mean by the Lego building blocks. I would save this sound file and I would call it what I think it sounds like. And I don't necessarily need it now, but in a year or two when I need it, then it's used like that. Like all the insect sounds in Hitman, that's my microwave. Because it's recorded with this old school tube microphone that takes up all the interference from the microwave. And when you pitch that down, it says, and that's how insects come to life in another video game. But that wasn't the point. I didn't record it because I was trying to create insects. I just recorded it because I thought it sounded cool. And then eventually I stored it in my library. And then when I needed it, I knew exactly which box to look for the block I needed to create the overall soundscape. So I quite often use this tool here called Transformizer, which is my friend's tool. Let's try and reinstall it perhaps. Anyway, Transformizer is this tool that I use quite a lot. It allows you to take any transient peak of any sound file and add it to another sound file, really. So if you have a gunshot, doof, 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 and then you simply say, I want the volume and the pitch of this to alter another sound or whatever, it comes out and creates these really wonderful sounds that you can use for a lot of things. And the point of that is that this giant happy accident generator, which is the way I generally work. Just create a bunch of content and then save it and then later on use it again for something else. Okay, might as well just do this. So this is the DARQ fmod project, and that's the thing in DARQ. I don't get to implement anything. I only add stuff to fmod and I send the project back, which means that I actually have to know very well where things are triggering. My first couple of questions when we were working on this was, is like the rotation scenes that you saw. My first question is not, so should I just make this one rotation sound? No, my question is, are all the objects in this scene, are they individual objects, or is it one object turning? Because if they're individual objects, I can attach things to individual things. But if it's one object, I can only attach one sound. Here we have the train level that you saw before. Play. But that's because Cubase is open. It did steal the driver bridge. And it's still not there. Anyway.
So to give you a brief and quick overview here of how Transformizer works, what we do is that we have all these 4 channels, and the top one here is our master channel. And here we can load anything that will have effect on the 3 other channels. I usually call Transformizer like the one giant happy accident generator, because it generates a lot of artifacts that are kind of unpredictable, yet if you use a tool a lot, then you find out how it actually works, and it generates a lot of useful things that you can use as building blocks for other things. I wouldn't necessarily create something from scratch in this and then use that fully. I would usually use it as building blocks. But anyway, we load this bang here, and then we load some other sounds here. But when these sliders here, we can tell this other sound to be adapting to the pitch and amplitude of the top one. And then we can mix all of these together. And then with a bunch of effects, such as distortion and reverbs, we can quite quickly generate a very, very nice boom, which is custom, which can then be used as an underlayer of something else. You probably get the picture already, that you can generate a lot of things with this that you can use for bigger projects. I use this a lot in DARQ all the time.
So do you use F mode and W wise as well?
Yes, I do. Depends on the project. I totally prefer to use Wise, but that's only because I worked with it more. I don't mind either platform whatsoever. But I like engines that give me flexibility. Like working on EVE Online is a total nightmare, because every time I had to do something, I have to ask a coder to do stuff for me, and I prefer to do things on my own because that gives me a lot of creativity. It gives me a lot of creativity whenever I do so. But the cool thing about, actually there is Wise here. What's cool about Wise is that when you just add a parameter, let's say on the top hierarchy or the mix master or anywhere you want to go, you can affect individual game objects on top of that hierarchy, which is like the ambient system of Hitman that I showed you before. It's just 2 RTPCs that are controlling these individual objects that you walk. Then when you walk through all these, when you walk through the different rooms, And that's what I like about Wise, because you can set one parameter and then it affects everything individually. You can do that in Fmod as well, but I haven't worked enough with it to like touch it like that. Okay, so when I get this project, I literally just get this list of events that the developer of the game has already put in. He's already named them. And I just add the sounds to them that I've made.
Do you have a tracking sheet between everything then, or a doc? Is it? No.
I think I have the...
It'd be nice if we went down the collab route, like the Unity kind of collaborative platform, so you could both work in the project at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's my cupboard in my living room just being shaken, and it just loops like this. But the point is that this is not a sound that is being used on its, well, it's being used on its own, but this is like a part of the soundscape I'm trying to build. It's not the sound that is the soundscape. This combined with this from this combined with the other one, they're located around the world, and you generate these soundscapes. So in my head, when we do this, all these sounds together makes the world come to life instead of being just like one sound that I've put together. I think this is in my basement somewhere. But all that becomes what you heard when you were walking around the game earlier. And where is the... I'm trying to find the... Yeah, here she is. Yeah. This is the lady with the jump scare that you hopefully experienced. This is a mix. This here is a vocoder. Well, I don't know how, like, a vocoded version between my own breathing and my daughter's breathing. Like my breathing is modulating her breathing, kind of. And my neighbors thinks I'm insane, by the way. And it's just this is quite simple. This is just me saying stupid stuff into the microphone, but then duplicating and pitching up and down on top of each other, and then mixing those. But then doing that in multiple layers. So even though it's just one sound, it may be like 5 or 6 layers or versions of the same thing going over and over again. And these are just sounds that are made like these. But it's really important, I think I've said it enough now, but whenever you create these sounds, you don't think of the soundscape as a whole. You need to understand where are all these sounds in a place. And when you create these sounds, you need to take into account that what if they all play at the same time? So you need a quite strict convention on which frequencies are allowed in every file that you create. So normally, Not on DARQ, because I just go nuts on compressors, but in other projects, we would normally have a convention that says no sound can have a frequency above 200 hertz unless it's an explosion or a gun or something like that, so that there's always space in the soundscape for it. And we always try to have sounds that are as low as possible so that you can always bump up the volume, because once it's too loud, you can't really bump it down without having to redo everything. So all this, I actually think there is
So you're not really doing too much in F mod, you're just sort of triggering them.
I'm just triggering them,
Yeah. So you're
And
not
then-
using too many like effects in F mod until you're doing
No.
stuff in Cubase.
Exactly. And it's actually the same thing in Wise. A lot of projects where you can do lots of things in Fmod and Wise for sure, but in a lot of projects it eventually comes down to that Fmod and Wise are being used as the most lame sampler you can imagine. Doing nothing but just playing back stuff. Which is also nice. It's a legit way of doing it, but sometimes you bump into these projects where there is like with DARQ, because I don't have access to the editor. I have access to Fmod, but there's no point in adding all sorts of logic in Fmod when I can't access the editor in Unity and then do things with it yet. We're probably gonna, when we do the final mix, but then it's probably gonna be too late. But this project is literally just creating these blocks and then doing that. I guess so. That's one of them. But technically, well, from another perspective, the guy doing this game, he's never made a game before.
Pretty impressive, though. I think it's really cool.
He's a composer. He had no idea how to code when he started. It's pretty cool, actually. Yeah, he's doing a great job, I think. But then he because he has no experience with pipeline and production and so on, like in the beginning when he said, no, you just send me the files, and maybe I would like to do other things with it and so on. But then we sort of like had to learn from each other, because I also at that time was very used to working on Cyberpunk and big projects where the pipeline is pretty strict. And he had the most loose pipeline I've ever seen, and it was very nice to meet that. But I also had to like work with that. It's not a bad thing, but it reminded me of how I used to work when I started out in my own career. The naivety of, sure, you can just send me files, because that's not. You don't necessarily get the best out of it unless everybody understands. And on this project, it's just the two of us doing the audio. And then I think he has like a couple of people doing some graphics for him, but generally he's doing everything on his own, which is pretty impressive, I think, for a guy who's never done a game before, who's not a programmer, too. Yeah.
What engine is he using? Is he using Unity?
And the cool thing about working with someone who doesn't know what he's doing, well, he does know what he's doing. It's just that he approaches this from this very naive angle, which is cool, because I know that he bumped into a lot of issues when he was talking to other programmers and so on, that, oh, you're going to have a problem with physics if you do this and that, or this is going to be inefficient, or you can't do it in this way, or so on, because they are thinking from the professional coding perspective. But as a newbie, he's completely naive, thinking that, of course I can rotate the world. And he just does. He's not thinking about, is this efficient, or is this efficient code, or anything like it. It just does it. I'm pretty sure that he does make the code efficient. It's not that, but he's like free of the limitations of being an experienced programmer, which is also why it's very, very like a freedom project for all of us because we really do whatever we want. Like I would never be able to submit this amount of compressed files to a AAA project whatsoever. It would be completely unacceptable, especially because none of them are normalized. They don't fit to they don't fit to any sort of sound level convention or anything like that, which they have to if you want to release, especially on PS4. And we don't really care, so it's all about just making cool sounds, really, for this project. And let me try and see if my USB thing here has some stuff on it that wasn't copied.
So are your main restrictions like time or not having access to tools or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, yeah, kind of. Like we don't have any restrictions as in terms. The main goal is to make sure that it just sounds cool.
Yeah.
And normally when you work on other projects, it's about, oh, you have to stick within memory limitations. You have to do this, you have to do that, and he doesn't give a flying whatever. And that makes it a lot more fun.
It's still going to work anyway. Computers are powerful enough nowadays. It doesn't really matter.
Yes, but then you work on something like Hitman and Cyberpunk, and then you find out they're completely not powerful enough. A month before release, they go, yeah, you have to cut your memory budget by 100 megabytes. Okay, thank you. No, and it's really difficult at that late in the stage to figure out how am I going to do this. So all your loops need to have cut off 1 or 2 seconds, and all your randomizations. If you have 10 randomized files, you can only have 5 per thing. And you do that very, very late, and it's extremely frustrating to work on.
Does that in turn essentially mean that a lot of times with AAA games where stuff's had to be cut memory-wise, they don't actually sound as good as they potentially originally would have done?
They probably end up sounding they probably sound almost the same. Usually it's also because sound designers don't care. We don't take it into the process from the very beginning. Like a room tone doesn't have to be a 5-minute loop. Like it can be 30 seconds. But we all submit 1 or 2 minute loops for all the rooms, and eventually you're a couple hundred megs over your budget. Then when you are to cut down, then it's just annoying to alter your sounds late in the process. But it can be quite, it sort of bothers your creative freedom because you like this sound the way it is. Like you have to really like kill your darlings, like a lot, which you just need to deal with really. EVE Online, back when I was doing EVE Online, the soundscape of these space stations that we're working on, a lot of these sounds are, by the way, not mine because they've been replaced, but how do you generate the sound of a giant space station like the one that you're going to see? And I think it's a login screen to begin with, and this is really like, I think I went to a speedway race and recorded that, and it's just 5 minutes of reverb this way, reverse it, 5 minutes of reverb the other way, and then you compress it, and then so on. And then this sounds like this space station. And now we have no sound again. So this is the speedway race. Like in my head, I can of course still hear the speedway race because I know that it is so. But when I was recording it, the speedway race, I'm not thinking, oh, speedway race. I'm already way ahead of that, thinking, okay, if I sauce this in 20 years of reverb, then it sounds cool. Or if I pitch it up and down, I get X amount of effects out of it.
So you constantly record every day without any kind of agenda, without brief. You just Dave was thinking crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't drive me crazy. It drives my ex-wife crazy. Like every time we were on holiday, I got the, are you recording again? Eyes. Like, honey, can you shut up? This subway track is really cool. Like, would you mind if we miss this train and take the next one because the brakes are cool? No, it can be a bit of a hurdle sometimes. Yeah, so now we exit the dock, and this is just also the speedway race. And if you haven't played Eve before, I'm pretty sure this would probably look extremely confusing. And there's nothing for you to understand. The universe is quite vast in EVE Online. And don't start playing it unless you have a couple of years to spare, really. Just saying. But here we will jump from one system to another. And then there will be this scanner overlay that we can hover over, which I think is in the video. And then you will also be able to hear that there is this tiny noise whenever you hover over these nodes. And that sound actually indicates how dangerous is this site to go to if you care about your life in the game, which you totally should. Yeah, there they are. So that noise, basically, indicates what's going on. You don't necessarily have to use it for something. It's just aesthetically also very cool to link it up to something like that. And it's not only that, you can use it for everything you want. And what I really enjoyed about it was that I can hook up everything to everything, which is nice. And there are seriously no limitations, which is also extremely nice. The plan for the YouTube channel, first I did it because I was applying for jobs myself, and I wanted to create a resource that would show that I know engines. That was literally what it started like. And then I found out that one of the things that always bothered me when I was starting out was that there was no resources. And every time I was following a resource back in 2008-ish, 9-ish, when I found YouTube videos of things, then it would always be this programmer or game developer or something like that who would explain things that I didn't need. Like I was interested in from the game audio perspective, a Unity tutorial that would just tell me how do I enter a collider and play a sound. That's all I'm interested in. I'm not interested in how do I make the character move, how do I make this happen, how do I understand coding, how do I understand C#, namespacing, giving that. No, I just want to know what to write to trigger a sound and what to do, how to stop it again. That's my sound design question. I'm not a developer who wants to know tons of things. So I started to create the channel. With that in mind, that I wanted to create the material answering the questions that I had myself. There it is. And you can spam me on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and whatever you want. Or on PSN or Xbox, whatever you want. And now we're locked in. Anyway, thank you for coming. And that's it for my class here at DBS Music in Bristol. I really hope you enjoyed it.